Back at the Sushi Phase restaurant, we were inhibiting the synthesis of DNA by blocking pyrimidine nucleotide synthesis. Well, I'm sure it comes as no surprise that another way to combat both rapidly dividing cancer cells and rapidly dividing lymphocytes is to inhibit purine nucleotide synthesis. Yeah, the anti-metabolites we will encounter in this video will consist of the cytotoxic purine analogs that disrupt specific enzymes in the synthesis pathway of adenosine monophosphate and guanosine monophosphate. That's AMP and GMP, your purine nucleotides. And to set the stage for purine synthesis, let's head over to one of the purest, most pious structures ever constructed, the Notre Dame Cathedral. The setting is Paris. The year is 1482, and the Notre Dame Cathedral is at the height of its glory. A time when this cathedral was the living, breathing soul of the city. You know, the cathedral was more alive than people knew. For legend told of a hunchback who lived in the bell tower, an abandoned infant taken in by the high priest Claude Frollo. Some say he doesn't really exist, that it's all just a children's tale. I say we climb up there and take a look ourselves, shall we? Up on the roof, we're going to illustrate the steps of purine nucleotide synthesis among the statues of gargoyles and religious figures that adorn the cathedral's majestic facade. Take a look in the back there as these sculptors fashion a new gargoyle for the cathedral's roof. Yeah, even after hundreds of years of construction, synthesis continues. Recall that nucleotides are comprised of three constituents, a nitrogenous base, a 5-carbon sugar, ribose, and some phosphate groups. Well, unique to the purine synthesis pathway, you actually start with that 5-pointed ribose sugar, subsequently building the purine on top of it bit by bit until you end up with a purine nucleoside. So, illustrated here is your starting molecule, a 5-pointed ribose sugar with 3 phosphate groups attached. Its name? Phosphoribosyl pyrophosphate, or PRPP. Its structure is depicted here by this pentagon-shaped pedestal. As the sculptors work on forming a purine on top of it, notice too that their hammers are P-shaped to represent the phosphate groups attached to the ribose. And if you follow the roof line into the foreground, we can see the eventual product of this piecewise purine sculpture. It's an intermediate nucleotide in the purine synthesis pathway called inosine monophosphate, or IMP, represented here by this gargoyle imp keeping watch over the city of Paris, perched upon his ribose pedestal. From the peak, follow the divided roofline down toward the 2 golden statues that adorn the cathedral's facade. Through separate enzymatic pathways, IMP can be metabolized into either adenosine monophosphate, AMP, or guanosine monophosphate, GMP. AMP and GMP are your purine nucleotides, the final products of this synthesis pathway. Look closely at the rightmost statue and you'll see that he's quite grumpy. A grump for GMP. Now take a look at the statue on the left with the long, spindly beard, just like a nice old grandpa. A gramps, if you will, for AMP. Thus, the imp is converted into the gramps and the grump. Also, notice the distinct purine pentagon on hexagon shape incorporated into these holy statues, an extra reminder that it's purine nucleotide synthesis we're talking about here. Lastly, their beautiful golden sheen should remind you that these 2 nucleotides are pure as gold, a memory device that's used by many students to quickly recall that the purine nucleotides are AMP and GMP. So, if you want to inhibit those rapidly dividing cancer cells or immune cells, throw a purine analog into the mix and you'll put a halt to de novo purine synthesis. Let me show you what I mean. You know, it seems we may just catch a glimpse of the hunchback yet, as a sinister plot unfolds on the rooftops of the cathedral. You may recognize this woman who dances in the square below. Her name is Esmeralda, and in this scene she represents Azathioprine, the prodrug form of our first cytotoxic purine analog. Think Azamerelda, Azathioprine. And since Azamerelda is the prodrug of a purine analog, we've incorporated that classic purine shape into her earrings. Azathioprine is converted into the cytotoxic purine analog 6-mercaptopurine, or 6-MP. And likewise, Aza here has been converted into a captive chained to the rooftop of the cathedral. Think captive 6-mercaptopurine. Once again, we've emphasized that pentagon on hexagon purine shape, this time within the chain links binding her to the roof. And here is the high priest now, prodding her with his staff. It turns out that 6MP is inactive in its parent form and must first be converted by hypoxanthine guanophosphorybosyl transferase, or HGPRT, into its many active metabolites. Notice that H, G, P, R, and T are emphasized on the high priest's vestments, and that he's aggravating, or activating, if you will, his captive. Let it remind you of HGPRT activating 6-mercaptopurine. The active metabolites of 6MP go on to inhibit the enzymes involved in the production of IMP from PRPP, which, if you recall, was symbolized by that unfinished sculpture in the background. Decreased formation of IMP, then, is depicted by our activated captive here, who kicks down the imp gargoyle as she tries to wrestle herself free. The active metabolites of 6MP also inhibit enzymes involved in the conversion of IMP to both AMP and GMP. All in all, the inhibition of these pathways leads to decreased de novo purine nucleotide production and a halt in DNA and RNA synthesis. DNA synthesis occurs in the S phase of the cell cycle, so just like the antimetabolites at the sushi phase restaurant, 6MP is cell cycle specific. You see that refurbished spiral staircase that leads down the bell tower? A little dilapidated? The spiral staircase is meant to evoke an image of a DNA double helix, and a break in its construction should remind you that 6MP inhibits DNA synthesis. This arrests the cell in S phase of the cell cycle, which is highlighted by the stairs out sign. As a cytotoxic antimetabolite, 6MP is used in the treatment of acute lymphoblastic leukemia, or ALL, as part of a combination chemotherapy regimen. So, take a look at the stained glass rose window below. See that cracked cancer crab? It's our recurring sketchy symbol for anti-neoplastic therapy. And since 6MP isn't used much outside of hematologic malignancy, the design of the window depicts the proliferation of B and T lymphocytes symbolized by antibody archers and white killer T-cell crusaders respectively. Remember that cancer cells are not the only rapidly dividing cells targeted by antimetabolites. Azathioprine and the purine antagonists also effectively inhibit the proliferation of immune cells and therefore can be used to treat a wide range of chronic inflammatory conditions. Take a look at these lanterns suspended from the spires of the cathedral, just in time for festival season. They look familiar, right? You should recognize them from the Sushi Phase restaurant where we highlighted the immunomodulatory effects of methotrexate. In this scene, let these torn antibody lanterns remind you of the numerous rheumatic and autoimmune conditions treated with azathioprine and 6MP, including graft rejection, lupus, polyarteritis nodosa, inflammatory myopathies, and autoimmune hemolytic anemia. Azathioprine can also be used as a DMARD in the long-term management of rheumatoid arthritis. You should recognize this other lantern design from our previous sketch as well. It looks like a bony joint, right? Not only that, the flame sitting inside should remind you of the inflammation associated with rheumatoid arthritis specifically. It turns out that azathioprine is not as effective as methotrexate, however, and is usually reserved for disease that is refractory to other therapies. Let's sketch in another string of lanterns over on the left. See how they kind of line up and look almost like inflamed colonic haustra? Azathioprine and 6MP can also be used in the management of inflammatory bowel disease such as Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. These agents effectively induce and maintain remission in these conditions. However, their use is limited by concerns of toxicity. A common side effect of azathioprine therapy is myelosuppression that can result in leukopenia and thrombocytopenia. Take a look down below at the nuns of Notre Dame, unaware of the villainous plot unfolding above them. As this nun here feeds the pigeons from her bone-shaped tray, let the marrow-evoking birdseed remind you of the bone marrow depletion caused by purine antimetabolite therapy. The leukopenia seen with myelosuppression can predispose patients to infection, both bacterial and viral. This includes reactivation of herpes zoster or exacerbation of chronic viral hepatitis. So keep in mind that cane we've incorporated into the statue as well. It's our recurring symbol for immunosuppression. And remember that patients on long-term azathioprine therapy require regular monitoring of the complete blood count. Azathioprine therapy is also associated with pancreatitis. So let's sketch in another nun here, squeezing a pancreas-esque sponge as she polishes that golden statue. We're going to put a liver-shaped stain on her apron as well because azathioprine therapy can lead to hepatotoxicity. Regular monitoring of aminotransferase levels is required. 6-mercaptopurine is converted to inactive metabolites by thiopurine methyltransferase, as well as another enzyme that should sound pretty familiar, xanthine oxidase. That's right, the same xanthine oxidase we met in our gout drug sketch. Embodied by the XO notes getting passed from hypoxanthine to xanthine until we ended up with uric acid excreted in the renal tubule. Recall that xanthine oxidase is inhibited by allopurinol, represented by the purity of that exasperated nun there. Inhibit xanthine oxidase and you inhibit uric acid production, but it doesn't stop there. Inhibit xanthine oxidase and you increase levels of purine analogs as well. That's why those allopurinol nuns don those purine-themed beads. Here, let me show you what I mean. The same allopurinol nuns are here at Notre Dame. Their job is to inhibit xanthine oxidase, of course. And take a look. They're wearing those purine-themed rosaries depicting an increase in purine analogs normally degraded by xanthine oxidase. Higher levels of 6-mercaptopurine, of course, means a greater risk of side effects. And that's why it's the allopurinol nuns themselves who are responsible for portraying the severe adverse effects associated with azathioprine and 6-MP therapy. Allopurinol's ability to increase 6-MP levels is so potent, in fact, that chemotherapy doses must be reduced by 75% if these drugs are taken together. Oh, and it looks like the hunchback has heard the cries of Esmeralda and swings to her aid. Instead of Quasimodo, think of him as Mofetil. Here to represent our next agent, Mycophenolate Mofetil, an immunosuppressive drug that acts on the purine synthesis pathway. Recall that inosine monophosphate, or IMP, is the precursor molecule for both AMP and GMP synthesis. Hence, the IMP gargoyle at the peak there sitting high above both the AMP gramps to the left and the GMP grump to the right. AMP and GMP are your purine nucleotides, of course, as depicted by their purine halos, and by the fact they're pure as gold. Mycophenolate inhibits IMP dehydrogenase, the enzyme that's responsible for the conversion of IMP to GMP. This is why Quasimodo is seen kicking over that GMP grump. Activated lymphocytes are dependent upon the de novo synthesis of purine nucleotides. Decreased GMP means decreased B and T cell proliferation and reduced antibody production. Mycophenolate, it turns out, is a powerful inhibitor of lymphocyte proliferation. Thus, it can be used to treat a wide array of rheumatic and autoimmune conditions, as highlighted by those recurring rheumatic and immune-themed lanterns attached to the rope that he swings in on. For instance, mycophenolate is used in the management of solid organ transplant rejection, as well as both acute and chronic graft versus host disease in bone marrow transplant patients. Newer immunosuppressant applications for mycophenolate include lupus nephritis, rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, and some dermatologic disorders. GI distress is very common with mycophenolate therapy and manifests as nausea, diarrhea, and abdominal cramping. Yeah, he's looking a little queasy up there. Like azathioprine, mycophenolate is also associated with myelosuppression requiring regular blood monitoring. In the setting of depleted immune cells, patients on mycophenolate therapy are at increased risk of infections. So we've included our recurring immunosuppressed cane on that GMP grump as a little reminder. To this day, the legend of the hunchback remains a mystery. You know, I'm not quite sure what I saw up there. Maybe it was just a shadow. Or maybe when you look up at the cathedral tower and you feel that chill penetrate your marrow, maybe it's Mofetil you feel, watching you from his concrete citadel. And maybe, just maybe, it's myelosuppression. So, yeah, you should probably get a CBC.